To obtain bread, one offers coin. To obtain rights, one offers taxes. To obtain wages, one offers labor. So then, what must one offer up to learn how to write an opening for this video? Orb on the Movements of the Earth is a manga by an author simply known as Uoto. It ran weekly from 2020 to 2022 and received a full anime adaptation in 2024, made by Studio Madhouse. In the 15th century, in a country that is totally not Poland, a young boy named Rafał has a bright future ahead of him. He's smart enough to enroll into university despite barely being a teenager, he's well liked by his peers, every moment of his life is a school test that he prepared a cheat sheet for. Sure, there are a few rocks on the road he has to kick aside, like the fact that studying the highly prestigious theology would mean that he would have to give up his hobby of astrology. But if he thinks about it rationally, the choice between an enjoyable pastime and a life of comfort is pretty easy. So, when a former heretic released from prison tells him that his forbidden studies, the work that got him imprisoned and tortured, were about making a model of the universe where the Earth orbits the Sun and not the other way around, it should be pretty easy for Rafał to just dismiss it and keep walking on the path set out for him. He is a rational guy, after all, and going against the wishes of the most powerful organization on the continent is anything but. So why then? Why does he find himself writing calculations and sketching the model late into the night, despite seeing in person what kind of damage is done to people who try to disprove the current dogma that places the Earth at the center of the universe? If you think that I just spoiled you on the series, this description covers like an episode and a half at the very beginning. I've seen some people saying that this is a slow start, or that the premise sounds boring but it's good, and I genuinely don't get that. Maybe it's the creaking old bones talking, but if someone approaches me with a story idea like, hey, you wanna talk about the discovery of heliocentrism? I immediately get excited because I never heard that pitch before. What made this concept so exciting for you, Uoto? Why choose this over wizards punching each other? Show me your work, tell me your secrets. And considering the manga won the Tezuka Osamu Cultural Grand Prize, making it appear to stories such as Naoki Urasawa's Monster and Takehiko Inoue's Vagabond, I think it's safe to say that the premise pays off. But I'm not an advertisement, and you're not here to listen to me list accolades, so let's start this over. I love Orb so goddamn much. I put this show on because, well, the plot hook intrigued me, and I wanted to see what the story had to say about the second most famous Polish scientist after Maria Skłodowska-Curie. The enthusiasm for the latter died down very quickly as I realized that the story decided for a much more fictional take, with the country referred to simply as Kingdom of P, a fully fictional cast involved in the events a century before Copernicus published his work, and an inquisition that is much closer to the popular understanding of the institution than how it actually operated over here. Like, yeah, we have records of about 70 people being executed by them over the span of 200 years, which is a horrible crime, but we also got freedom of religion written into law in 1573, when the rest of Europe really got them bonfires going. But damn did any nitpicks I had about any of that just crumble and die under the sheer power of the story itself. The 25 short episodes pack more character development and twists than anything else could in a 5-season runtime. With each new person introduced, you immediately understand what their deal is, and then they just keep surprising you again and again, despite the fact that realistically you've known them for a few hours. I wish I could find the words to tell you how goddamn impressive that is on a writing level. But if I'm to dodge spoilers, I really can't say much. The characters are so dynamic, the events progress at such a pace that any semblance of status quo never really settles in. And over the course of these episodes, the series just bombards you with questions. What is the nature of truth? What structures would oppose looking for it, and why? What of the people who dedicated their entire lives to the pursuit of truth, and it turns out they could never reach it? In turn, what drives people to take extreme measures in that pursuit? Because, you see, Orb is about heliocentrism for a very simple reason. We know how this story ends. During the half of millennium that happened between then and now, we gathered immeasurable amounts of empirical evidence proving that this model of the solar system is correct. But the characters in this story do not know that. And through them, maybe we can find a new perspective on how we look at the unknown frontiers we are still struggling with to this day. And we can also get a bit sad about the light pollution making casual stargazing much more difficult, before we remember that being able to come back home at night without getting jumped is a pretty good trade-off, all things considered. Alright, that's how much of a recommendation I'm gonna give without getting into spoilers. It's peak, go watch it, close this video if you haven't. And if you already have, boy, let's get right into pondering that orb. Or should I say... As usual for this channel, I'm not gonna go through the story bit by bit, we're gonna focus on the characters. The first arc of the story is pretty straightforward, all things considered. We have Hubert, the freshly released heretic, being a visual warning to the world. Look, this is what will happen to you if you dare to question the church dogma on the nature of the universe. And the first thing he does after leaving jail is get back to work and threaten a teenager into helping him because his eyesight is not good enough anymore. In his own words, he wants to live in a beautiful world, and he finds that beauty in mathematical certainties. The current model of the universe is too chaotic to be true. He cannot believe in a perfect creation that would follow such erratic patterns. And just when you think that's all there is to him, after seeing him hold a child at knife point to continue this work, he selflessly sacrifices his own life for that same child, after knowing him for a few weeks at most. He doesn't care how much pain he has to go through to find the truth, but the idea of the same pain being inflicted onto someone makes him stop in his tracks, to the point of even instructing Raphael to burn all the notes on the study of heliocentrism to make absolutely sure that such fate would not befall him even after Hubert's death. Another person of interest with a short arc is Potocki, the adoptive father of Raphael. Though Potocki is a surname, this series keeps only giving one name to each character, but it works out pretty well for the most part. In fact, Potocki is a name that belonged to one of the biggest and wealthiest noble houses in Poland, but this doesn't seem to play a part in this story. Either way, our guy is a priest formerly jailed for the same heresy, but who recalled his blasphemy and was let go. As his body shows no signs of torture, it can be inferred he folded early and no damage was done to his body, after which he probably decided to turn a new leaf, leave heliocentrism behind and adopt Raphael, who became his pride and joy over the years. He also tries to keep him safe from his own mistakes, pushing the boy to study theology and abandon his stargazing. And yet, Potocki himself couldn't quite let go, keeping numerous tomes on the topic in his home. The fact that he's a priest is also significant in two ways. One, it marks him as someone educated. Despite the common portrayal of religion being an antithesis to knowledge and the core conflict of the series, the Venn diagram of preaching and teaching in that time period could as well be a circle. But more importantly, as someone that is part of a larger system of the church, he is quick to take the Inquisition at their word when they say that Raphael can go through a trial without getting harmed. Once again, he gives up without a fight. Though, to be fair to him, it's not like he was lied to. And somewhere between these two adults, we have Raphael, the first central character of the story. Following the risk-averse path charted for him by his father, yet unable to quite leave behind his passion for observing the night sky. Someone who at first views himself as rational and level-headed, but after witnessing the mathematical beauty of heliocentrism, understands that these traits were nothing but arrogance and bullheadedness. And honestly, acceptance of these parts of himself fits him way better than hyping himself up. My guy is willing to literally step into fire to protect what he believes in. So it probably should be no surprise that when asked to denounce his observations and fall in line, he instead does a pro-philosopher move, going from someone who says what he needs, true or not, for his safety, to someone willing to die for an idea. And just like Socrates is present in the Western tradition of philosophy to this day, Raphael never really stops haunting the narrative moving forward. With him gone as a connection point, the observation notes remain safe, free to be discovered by someone else. It's also quite sweet how he left a note saying that 10% of the profits from publishing these findings should go to his dad. I'm sure it won't echo throughout the entire story. And look, it says Earth in Polish. Neat. Finally, we have the one person who we will see much more of in the later parts of the story, Novak the Inquisitor. It's really funny to me that they named him that because Novak is one of the most common surnames in Poland. He really is just a guy. But he's also a parallel to Raphael in this part. He has his life all figured out. Formerly a mercenary that risked his life on the daily, now he is working directly under the bishop. all he has to do to retain this cozy job and keep his family safe is go with the flow and do as he's told. And just like the little blonde genius, he is inquisitive and observant. That is what this line of work asks for, after all. Rafał is ready to dedicate decades of his life to research. Novak is more than willing to wait for a prisoner's nails to grow back so he can rip them out again. They're both asking questions, even if very different ones. And just like being told about heliocentrism changes Rafał and completely alters his view of the world and himself, Novak's laid-back attitude is similarly shattered with Rafał's death. Watching a child kill himself for an idea is hard to forget, especially for someone whose daughter is going to turn the same age one day. And just like Rafał was ready to lay down his life to prove heliocentrism, Novak gains the same conviction regarding eradicating the very idea. And we'll see how that works out for him very soon. 10 years later, the theory of heliocentrism is still at large, as the stone chest with Rafał and Hubert's writing has been discovered by people looking to the stars. But this time, while the story certainly starts with these like-minded people, the central character of this arc is no scientist. At least, not at first. The quote-unquote protagonist of this arc is Oczy, a dualist for hire with a dour outlook on life. There is some bilingual irony here. His name is literally the Polish word for eyes, and he is both blessed with excellent eyesight that made him enjoy looking to the night sky as a child, and as an adult he is unable to lift his head because being told all his life that the Earth is the lowest point of the universe that everything falls to made him see the stars as eyes of the universe looking down on him, the lowest of the low, a man of low social class and a legally sanctioned murderer. He can't wait to die and ascend to heaven, and his primary method of solving conflict outside of work is profoundly apologizing for ever being born. And he is utterly terrified that no afterlife awaits him, either because of the fact he is a sinner, or because everyone he's ever killed looked absolutely terrified at the end, as if nothing awaited them at all. His partner in the organization is Grass, a much more optimistic man. Though that was not always the case. When he lost his family to the plague, he was just as suicidal as Oczy, but he found meaning again in stargazing. He has been observing the movements of Mars for 2 years, and they are about to form a perfect circle, a message to him from his wife and child in heaven that everything is in order, that everything has its place and beauty. And even as the movements stop and go back due to the planet's retrograde motion, it shakes him, but he is still able to compose himself. But it is that momentary lapse of faith that allows a heretic they're escorting to captivate him with a speech about uncertainty of afterlife and a study into the stars, leading to the duo freeing him, fighting off the other guards, oh look, it's Novak again, and finding the stone chest with Rafał's notes. And on the way to consult these findings with a monk that first told Grass about Mars's movements, the optimistic half of the duo falls off a crumbling bridge and dies, though not before giving the book, amulet and some parting words to Oczy, who is desperately clinging to keep his body alive. Grass's death is random and senseless, just like his family dying from the plague, but unlike then, now he is able to go out with a sense of satisfaction, that he contributed to something bigger and he can see it live on by passing these notes on heliocentrism to Oczy. The monk in question is Badeni, a proper asshole that joined the cloth for his own academic pursuits, completely disinterested when it comes to dealing with the members of his parish. In fact, Badeni is yet another Polish noble family name, and the contrast between him and Oczy is really strong. A peasant and a noble, guy with excellent eyesight and one with a single eye barely working, an illiterate and a scholar, one seeing himself as the lowest of the low, and one that thinks he's smarter than everyone else in the room. And yet they join forces to prove heliocentrism for 2 starkly opposite reasons. Badeni does it for personal glory and to prove his superiority, and Oczy is driven by the belief that if Earth is not at the bottom of the universe, but a part of the heavens, then there is definite proof that it is not the horrible place he thought it is for his entire life. For both of them, the truth of how the solar system operates is symbolic of something greater, something they both want to believe, but were forced to look away from for their entire lives. And Badeni burns the note that says 10% of profits should go to Potocki. Well, I guess that's it for that plot thread. The third member of the crew that joins them is Jolenta, who works at an academy but is pushed out of attending lectures by peer pressure from the otherwise all-male faculty. She even writes a thesis of her own at age 14, only to get all credit stolen by her superior to protect her, because a woman in academia getting attention would put her in danger. When watching the series, I thought it's weird that she isn't called Jolanta, which would be the correct spelling of the name, but then when doing research for this video, I found out that there are records of the form Jolenta going back to the 13th century, so what the fuck do I know about my own native language? Anyway, she is someone between Badeni and Oczy when it comes to characterization. Someone of low birth, pushed down by the systemic sexism around her, and forced to believe it's best for her to keep her head down, yet intensely desiring recognition, to publish under her own name, to get recognition for her intellect. She is also a bit of a raffle, being a curious child, getting her gloves from her loving father to be able to study even when it gets cold. Oh, and said father is the Inquisitor Novak. Yeah, remember how I said him being a father probably made Raphael's death hit all the harder? Imagine watching your beloved daughter grow up into a very similar kind of a person. However, when it comes to Jolenta herself, it's also important to know that she finds the acts of writing and reading miraculous. To be able to converse with someone who already died, even if it was centuries ago, is nothing short of a wonder. So, in some way, we can understand her through that belief as well, that her desire to publish her work under her own name is not just pride and the desire for recognition now, but also a wish to be remembered and understood, even if someone that really pays attention to her ideas comes long after her death. And Badeni's obsession with making sure that his work is published under his name and none other is, perhaps, a similar sentiment from him. He keeps his feelings close to his chest, but we can understand him better through the choice of his like-minded company. She helps the team get access to the observation notes of Count Piast, who dedicated his entire life to astronomy, despite his family denouncing him for following such an unglamorous field of study. The Piasts were, in fact, the first ruling dynasty of Poland, though not the one on the throne during the events of this story. The last Piast king died in 1370. The Count found a new home in the academy, giving his entire life to perfecting the model of the universe. But very early in this pursuit, he dismissed an observation he made that could have changed the basic assumptions of the entire field of study. A fully illuminated Venus, suggesting that it and the Sun did not orbit the Earth, but in fact that both planets revolve around the Sun. And of course, the observation is repeated by Oczy, which finally leads the old Count to give up access to his observation notes, utterly conflicted on whether he wasted his entire life or if his work would prove useful in finding the truth. Fun fact, this is two astronomical references in one. Observing Venus was done by Galileo Galilei and presented as him as the ultimate proof that Copernicus's heliocentric model is correct. And a Danish astronomer, Tycho Brahe, spent 30 years observing the night sky and proposing a model of the Sun orbiting the Earth and all other planets orbiting the Sun. And even if the model proved incorrect, Brahe's meticulous notes led others, namely Kepler and Newton, to discoveries regarded as correct to this day. So rest easy, Count, your life's work has not been in vain. At least you died from old age and not from being too polite to leave the table despite your kidneys and bladder bursting at the seams from too much beer, like your real-life counterpart allegedly did. This progress and the company of each other slowly but surely changes the main trio. Jolenta's progression, at least for now, is the simplest. She grows much more confident, openly talking with the other two about her desire to work and publish as a woman, hopefully paving the way for more girls like her. Oczy grows more optimistic, learns to read, and writes a book on their exploits, even considering joining a university after their work on heliocentrism is finished. For the first time, he looks forward to living his life rather than begging for death. And Badeni just listens to them in shock. In part because he has to confront their friendship with his own elitist beliefs about class structure and education, but also because he can probably see something of himself in them. As a student, he confronted a friend about stealing credit for joint research and ended up killing him in a duel. In other words, he is a killer like Oczy, yet still wanted to not waste his own potential and continued to devote himself to studying. As a monk, he stepped out of the arbitrary lines set by his superiors and read a book he was supposed to have no access to, mirroring Jolenta's situation, and got hot wax poured into his eyes for the trouble. Despite meeting these people rather randomly, he feels a very close kinship with them. Of course, we're talking about a man that has the emotional honesty of a cat, so he'll never admit it to them directly. My guy's reaction to excitement is puking his guts out rather than just cracking a goddamn smile even when he's alone. I love him. Though that dishonesty also pushes away people less resilient to his bullshit, like the priest Grabowski, that ends up condemning the monk to death by reporting the journal he found near Piast's academy. So how does Novak fare in this arc? Once again, he eerily mirrors the protagonists. For the first time we see him as a warrior to be feared, both in the first confrontation with Oczy and at the end, when he and his group approach the hideout. He even tells one of the recruits that someone that is to be feared at the battlefield is not someone who is ready to kill, but someone who is ready to die. These words serve to underline Oczy's conviction, as he is willing to lie down his life to give Baden time to escape and preserve the hope of heliocentrism, but it also says a lot about the Inquisitor himself, who is more than a fair match for the ex-duelist. He also employs a fake jovial facade when approaching the duo sitting in a tavern with Jolenta, similar to how Badeni pretended to be much more social and talkative, even as he was ready to throw her under the proverbial wagon behind her back. Novak is also showing that he is a true believer in this arc, taking the question of why heliocentrists keep showing up rather seriously, despite the fact that what awaits them is either eternal damnation or nothingness. Which, again, contrasts with Badeni. The Inquisitor has these questions and reservations, but fails to listen to the people he's torturing, whereas the monk first pleads with Oczy to not condemn himself to hell by killing clergymen, but in the end says a prayer for him to have a hand in sparing him from damnation, to actually help him in the one way he can, despite ignoring the other believers from the church he worked at before. As for Novak's connection with Jolenta, well, he's her father of course, but there is also this one flashback we get, where he gets her the gloves when she was a child, and they do not fit due to a mistake, leading to her throwing a tantrum and cursing God's name. He scolds her harshly and immediately regrets it, feeling conflicted on how, as a good parent, he should both comfort his crying child, but also can't let her commit blasphemy like this. The arbitrary framework that he has been put in by his society and the role he plays in it stopped him from what he knew in his bones to be right, just like the same societal pressure kept his daughter from being able to freely use her talents. At least, he did go back in with the intention of apologizing. If nothing else, he does truly love her. In a moment of genuine friendship, Badeni spills the beans to protect Oczy from having his eyes gouged out, because he knows how much it hurts from first-hand experience. Heck, our sad boy gets to talk with someone quite overtly implied to be God when knocked out. The notes in the stone chest get burned, yet our boys die with a content expression on their faces, feeling that they do not regret any choice they made in the pursuit of truth. And despite doing this to protect his daughter from their influence, Novak is told Jolenta was caught and tried as a heretic as well. This piece of shit, about whom we'll say more later, just used the opportunity to discredit Novak and climb the clergy ladder. The audience knows she's alive because one of the Inquisitors had a conscience and paid the price for it, but Novak is absolutely devastated. He is on the receiving end of what he inflicted onto people like Potocki. So how does heliocentrism survive if the only one remaining is a teenage girl on the run from the clergy, all the notes and observations are gone, and there was nobody else to carry the torch? Well, you see, despite burning the note from Rafał and Oczy's simple language book, Badeni actually read both of them and tattooed their contents on the back of the heads of homeless people. And he even included the part about 10% of profits going to Potocki, including his address, which only he knew because Oczy was still illiterate at that point. I swear to God, this guy was such a tsundere, piece of... 25 more years pass, and we find ourselves following Draka, a girl from a nomad tribe. The nomads in question are quite obviously Romani people, who did first arrive in Poland around the end of the 14th and start of the 15th century, in large part due to fleeing persecution in the West. Her name doesn't seem to be of that origin, however, so I'm inclined to read it as coming from a Polish word. Over here, Draka means a fight, a ruckus, a fuss, and that does seem to fit her rather well. She might not be a shonen protagonist, but she is still really confrontational and outspoken. She was traumatized as a child by her father dying, leaving behind only a tattered cloak and a handful of blood-soaked coins, and she has been obsessed with money ever since. If the tribe had enough to go by, her father would still be alive after all. And so she devised a scheme to gather cloth and repurpose it, to make her kin produce rather than beg and steal, and even tries to push proto-capitalistic notions of competition. But even despite the fact that her ideas brought her people comfort and stability, it's not enough. It's never enough. The very idea of something taking that peace away haunts her. She was comforted by her uncle Dhruv, whose name actually is of Indian origin, meaning unmovable, unshakable. True to that, he has a set of beliefs meant to keep him unshaken by whatever happens, that there is no God, and that he should prioritize his own survival over anything else, even his own convictions. The first lesson sticks with young Draka, and she is an atheist still when she is introduced to the story, but she felt that the second point is rather self-contradictory and quickly dismissed it. In the present day, he is a drunk who keeps saying he won't live much longer, yet is still kicking. And when visiting his stash in an abandoned house, he's found by the clergy, who were there for reasons we'll soon explain. And when they're about to just kill him and take his stuff, he bargains his own niece's freedom to get away. And then he fucking dies purely by accident, getting a stray hit in a fight that breaks out later. And despite not believing in hell, not believing he did anything wrong as long as he did it for his own survival, he still dies cursing out his fate, just like all the people killed by Ochi in the duels. His lack of belief did not save him from the fear of death, despite the fact that the previous arc could imply that this was why people couldn't face their mortality. And again, Grass died just as randomly, but he could do so with a smile on his face. The clergy was in the abandoned town because they were hunting down the Heretic Liberation Front, a rogue group going around and, well, liberating heretics. In their latest stint, they brought gunpowder to a monastery and stole a certain book from their contraband storage, on the movements of Earth, penned by one Ochi. They hid in the abandoned village, then got tracked by the church, hid the book, Draka found and read it, and then she burned it to be taken with them so she could read it out for print, because she memorized the whole thing. Unorthodox, but hey, there's money to be made by getting involved in publishing something this revolutionary. The social climate is slowly, but surely, inching towards what we now know as the Reformation. The printing press has been invented, the time to get this thing out into the world is now. The leader of this particular unit of the front is Captain Schmidt, which is German for Smith. As you might have guessed, an incredibly common name, and as such I'm reading this guy as a bit of a Novak that sided against the church. Also, the name is pretty ironic, considering his outlook as someone who has no faith in human intellect, views all of our creations as imperfect copies of nature, and so forth. He utilizes technology only so far as to help him fight against the current state of society, which he views as inherently flawed, divergent from the pure beauty of God's creation, and something to be dismantled. And you can't really call him a hypocrite, considering that his entire life he followed his instincts and only did what he wanted to do. Which quite quickly puts him in ideological conflict with Draka, who is all about the fruits of intellect, like her own ideas, money, and the two remnants of her father she is still holding on to. The clearest portrayal of this is the first sunrise that they both see on their journey. Schmidt opens his arms and welcomes it as the purest form of the beauty he sees in the world, and Draka looks away, still remembering the morning when she was told she lost her family, and seeing it as a symbol of inevitable fate that she can't ever fight against, no matter how smart and industrious she is. Though they are also very similar in a way, as both of them were set on their respective paths by the loss of family, only really differing in how they chose to internalize these events. They even have a chat later down the line quoting Plato and Aristotle at each other, basically pointing the audience to whom they should read if they agree with one of them, which is neat. Also, shoutouts to the fact that she has to state, in plain words, that she does not believe in God 3 times before anyone even thinks that is exactly what she means. Her atheism is so unthinkable to her contemporaries that it's downright funny. Definitely not triggering a deluge of memories about saying the same thing to my family, no siree. The de facto leader of this movement is, of course, Jolenta, and she is the one who ordered recovering Ochi's book. She is initially irritated with Draka for destroying something her friend made, but when she transcribes the words, it feels as if he was there in the room with her, despite dying a quarter of a century ago. The ability to write and read are truly miraculous, even if she was not reading the words directly, but they were rather told to her by a complete stranger. The ladies also have a chat about convictions and assumptions, and how the latter are inevitable as a foundation is needed for every thought process. And the final conclusion given by Jolenta, that wandering in the dark is how we find out what is right, clearly leaves an impression on Draka, who starts quietly questioning her basic assumptions about her life and why she stays around these people. At first it was for profit and to quell her own fear of death, but now she doesn't quite know what is pushing her forward. But wandering in the dark is how one finds out what's right. And later down the line we have Draka giving up her father's cloak and coins, things she clinged to most of her life, pretty much symbolic of these base assumptions and worldviews, to help get the book published. She even symbolically takes on Jolenta's mantle. In general, it becomes very obvious that this entire arc is about people dealing with loss and how they all approach grief differently because of their own assumptions. Draka viewed her loss as stemming from poverty and unjust fate. Schmidt viewed his loss as caused by the flaws in human interpretations of the divine. Jolenta lost her family and friends because of Church's repression of the ideas. Novak thinks he lost his daughter because of heliocentrism. We also get a small chat with Lewandowski, and he gives Draka his story of being unable to tell his dying sister what was the reason for her to live. He wants to affirm death, not run from it. Again, a familiar tragedy, yet a completely different conclusion reached from it. Everyone learns from their history, even if they all learn different things. The culmination of how these assumptions can lead to tragedy is in Jolenta's final moments. She stays behind to buy time for others to escape with the manuscript, while the Inquisition soldiers arrive. And when her father steps out of the carriage, I fully believe that they recognized each other instantly. But there was no time for either of them to think about it and try to find a different solution to what each of them wanted. They both did what they thought was right to make sure that the tragedies they suffered never befall anyone else. And even if they saw for a brief moment that they haven't lost each other, the path was already set and Jolenta made a choice to prioritize freedom of everyone over her own feelings. And Novak just goes straight to denial and doesn't say a thing, but boy, he sure picks up her hand and starts carrying it with him. The situation gets no easier when they arrive at the printing press and it turns out that the third member of the squad, Fry, has been a traitor all along, waiting for the right moment to wipe the entire movement out. His name means free in German, which again rings pretty ironic, considering his mind is in the clutches of his past. Long story short, his family also died due to religious persecution and difference in interpretation, just like Schmidt's, but it was Fry's uncle who stood against Church's orthodoxy and killed his parents, leading the boy to despise all forms of heresy. This clearly shakes Schmidt, possibly because he can see how his life could have gone down the same path, implying that maybe the plan set out for everyone isn't as clear-cut as he's believed. Plus, he's known this guy for years and never suspected a thing, so this put a dent in his pride, in his instinctual understanding of the world as well. Though it's interesting that Fry's last words are that of doubt, despite holding onto this conviction all his life, realizing the cross he held onto ever since he was a child is only visible to him, that this conviction only really mattered to him and him alone. And so, when the decision on whether to run for the hills or buy time for Draka to secure the manuscript is made by a coin toss, Schmidt flips the coin over. For the first time in his life, he forgoes fate in favor of his own agency, and he's terrified, riding into the unknown, having to make peace with the fact that anyone he kills for this goal is a victim of his decision and nothing else. And yet, he does it, and dies content with the fate he chose, just like all the others that carried the torch of heliocentrism before him. Draka rides off to try and sell the script to Antoni, the current bishop, and an absolutely unscrupulous piece of work. He ordered the torture of Jolenta and an execution of the monk that let her escape, later pretending that his burning body is her, just to discredit Novak and, by proxy, the bishop that was at power at the time, who is, as it happens, his own father. And 25 years later, Antoni is more than down to accept Draka as payment, with some very dark implications, only engaging her in conversation briefly because she's clearly incredibly bright and observant. Absolutely terrible human being with no morals or beliefs, which makes him a perfect candidate to publish this book. There's money to be made, and he does not share the assumptions of everyone else in the clergy. He even makes perfect sense when he tells Novak that the persecution of heliocentrism could have been derived from nothing but his father's malice. Fucking worst person you know making a good point, you hate to see it. At least he gets shanked by Novak and his church gets set on fire, and just like everyone else who was self-serving throughout the story, he dies with shock on his face. Draka also gets hurt and runs away, sending a letter she promised to deliver. In her final moments, she sees the sun rise for the final time, and just like Schmidt, she opens her arms and welcomes it. He learned to embrace his own agency thanks to her, and she learned from him how to let go of it when nothing can be done. Finally, let's talk about Novak one last time. He starts this arc off as a depressed drunk, similar to Draka's uncle, but snaps out of it immediately when informed the book was stolen. His one conviction to see heliocentrism die blindly driving him forward. And 35 years ago, if a bishop told him, "Hey man, look, this isn't part of your job anymore," he would go home and enjoy some extra time off. But he is not that man anymore. Only once his conviction is seen through, after he makes sure everyone involved is dead or dying, the church and the manuscript in it on fire, does he finally sit down and reflect that his blind hatred made him the villain of this story. And he gets to chat with Rafał, of all people. Clearly a figment of his own imagination, which is why the series makes sure to show him stepping out of the way of falling debris. It's probably prudent to mention now that Rafał is the Polish version of the name Raphael, same as the archangel that is the patron of healing and travelers in Christianity. And with the earlier portrayal of Ochi getting to chat with God portrayed as a kindly university teacher, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Novak is right when he says that this boy surrounded by flames symbolizes the first and final chance given to him to see the truth. It's just that he doesn't realize that the first and last are 35 years apart. And while he didn't take the first chance, he does take the last one, putting the glove onto Jolenta's dismembered hand and seeing that it fits perfectly. And in his last moments, he does not curse his fate or stare in wide-eyed shock. He prays, apologizes and begs forgiveness, not for himself but his daughter. And in that final moment, he is bathed in light and dies in peace. Despite a lifetime of mistakes, he did one thing right and marked himself as the same kind of person as those he persecuted. A man of the 15th century. The next arc happens pretty much at the same time as the finale of the third one, but it is starkly different. The chalk drawings of characters in the opening are gone, forgotten by history. And rather than showing us a typical fantasy city subtitled Kingdom of P, it portrays the city of Kraków, the then capital of Poland, circa 1468. Seriously, this is pretty much a drawing of the Old Town district and it's great. And you know what? Right here we have the statue of Mikołaj Kopernik, or Copernicus as his name is Latinized. I'm not throwing shade here, we call Galileo Galilei Galileusz, localization of names like that used to be pretty common. And over here we have Collegium Maius of the Jagiellonian University, one of the first universities in Europe and the alma mater of the astronomer and yours truly. Actually, I've seen this building maybe a handful of times, the Institute of Philosophy is somewhere else, this building is a museum now. Am I showing you my shaky camera footage of a stroll across this city to brag? Yes, but I also want to drive a point that despite knowing about Copernic ever since I was a child, I've never heard of Wojciech or Albert Brudzewski, until I watched this series. Granted, I wasn't exactly a good student when it came to history, and the guy was not completely forgotten. It would be very difficult for a Japanese manga author to include him if he was, but there are no statues or plaques dedicated to him outside of his hometown of Brudzewo. And it's just such a clever fucking trick to make the final person we see in the series not the famous guy that every child in Poland knows about, but a much less known guy that still served as an important domino in the chain of events that led to the discovery of heliocentrism in our world. To the very end, the series is not about the big and loud event that is written down in history, but all the little steps that led up to it. We are all standing on the shoulders of giants, and most of them are completely invisible to us for one reason or another. And then the series throws a curveball at us by saying that his teacher was none other than Rafał. And you go, huh? What? But I thought... And that makes you equivalent with the people of the past, and of this story getting confronted with heliocentrism for the first time. A sudden, small thing that just makes you question everything you knew about this story, forcing you to reinterpret everything you know. It's honestly upsetting how fucking good of a narrative trick this is, and Uoto, the mangaka, very deliberately avoids giving answers on that one particular part of the story, because it's up to you to make sense of it. At the very start of the story, we are asked a question that gets repeated at the end by a priest that Albert is confessing to. What do you have to offer up to obtain the truth of this world? And it's very easy to watch this story unfold and conclude that the answer is... Chi. People bled and shed blood for the truth. But in the final arc, the adult Rafał kills Albert's father to obtain the notes, pushing the young mind away from any form of academia, away from discovering the truth. It takes a talk with a priest regretful of his past and confronting his memories of both his father and teacher, two men that he loved and yet knew to be wrong in different regards, to push him back to join a university. And the final piece that puts him on the path of doubting geocentrism is simply overhearing two people talk about a letter they received. That 10% of profits from a book titled On the Movements of the Earth should go to the previous tenant of that address named Potocki. The struggle, the blood spilled, the pain and wonder, these were definitely important. But the one thing that survived through it is the one act of pure altruism that each character carried out on behalf of their predecessors, repeating again and again that a man they never heard of should receive 10% of profits for their work. You can interpret it as confirmation of Violenta's words that history is the will of God working through people, slowly but surely, towards a given outcome by trial and error. But my atheistic ass is instead going to conclude that a simple act of kindness outlives all else. The truth about the universe, that we orbit around the sun? That's a simple thing, with a single, simple answer. It will be there whether we realize it or not. But people are so much more complex, and throughout the series we see them meet and change each other, conflicting worldviews bending each other to meet in the middle, with none of them ever being portrayed as more true than the other. Closing yourself off from that, from dialogue and friendship, sets you on a path of blind obedience to assumptions that will ruin you. But a simple, seemingly insignificant kindness will echo throughout the ages in ways nobody could ever predict. A monk with an eye patch could write a perfect treatise on heliocentrism, only for it to be lost to time forever. But because he preserved the work of his friend, including a short note about a profit split with a man he never met, the same idea saw print in Nuremberg exactly 100 years later. Oh yeah, I'm gonna make a shorter video this time and it's 40 minutes again. Bravo, Tidu. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Next one is probably gonna be in June, because I'm gonna take them easy. And this video has been sponsored by the Patreon supporters now visible on the screen. We have a new person in the fray, NoDoPlay, and if you'd like to join them and support me, I would greatly appreciate that. If not, hey, sharing is caring. And I don't know what the next video is going to be on, but we'll see. Cheerio.